Communicating in English raises questions like, what's the proper way of using English? And why do we use English anyway? So first, let's hear how people understand what standard English is and how it relates to their lives.
In a Canadian context, it would be a CBC commentator like Stephen Quinn in the morning.
I think people in the news reporters speak standard English, and professional speakers will speak standard English.
Thinking about this growing up in Ireland, television is probably a good place to start. So I might have been looking at the news, for example, BBC News, and then you have someone speaking RP, British English, reading the news live from the BBC. And then I could switch the channel and watch the Irish news on the Irish equivalent, that would be RTE. And they would have a different version of English, but it would also be standard. It's the standard sort of newsreader dialect in Ireland.
To me, I think standard English is appropriate grammar and native English, and like fluency is also a key criteria in standard English, I think, because like the speed or the fluency in our conversation should be very smooth, and then we don't have to think or like translate to another language.
There are actually, so I'd like to, if I can I can use a more proper English, more proper pronunciation. So it's more better, I think.
I would have to distinguish, of course, then between the speaking and the writing. Because for the writing component, that's where the standard English comes in terms of academic writing. There is a format, there's a way to lay it out. I mean, if you're doing an APA or MLA or whatever, there's certainly the structural basis of how you're presenting something, but then there's the requirement to use, syntax and grammar and so on appropriately so that people will be able to read it. So yes, I think it's important that academic writing is to a standard where everyone can read and understand it.
I find that written English is actually good to know the standards because it helps to increase the clarity.
Every place, every society, there's always a standard how you do things. So that is what I mean by a proper way.
One of the things for me as a large African American man, I'm 6'3", 200 plus pounds. There's some unconscious stuff that I know goes on with me around white comfort. And so speaking quote unquote standard English is a part of the way of not only connecting, but also making people feel comfortable. I guess I'll go with something that Malcolm X said. He said, where you're in France and you want to talk to someone who's French, you need to know how to speak French. What I find here is that when I'm speaking to, quote unquote, using the mainstream way in which Canadians speak, it's important to be able to be effective in communicating.
Some people who are not speakers of standard English desire to speak like a native speaker, but some don't. Yet others even reject the idea of standard English.
Some students or parents in Taiwan, they all, I believe, I would not say all of them, but I think a big part of people will try to pursue whole accurate or standard accent.
I want people to aspire me. Wow, I like your English, I like your accent, you like a native speaker. It makes me feel more comfortable or confidence. And actually, I'm not a native speaker in Japanese. I was born in China, and when I was 13, I moved to Japan. and I learned Japanese. And yeah, I spent maybe about 10 years to start to learn Japanese. And now, like, everybody cannot recognize I'm not a native speaker in Japanese. So yeah.
I'm really interested in the diversity of the accent of the place, like British and also American or Canadian or anywhere else. And I'm really interested in these differences, and I really like these accent. So maybe I agree with the accent, like Japanese accent or Asian accent. I think I like it.
I don't like the concept of there being a standard, because then it feels like it leans open to gatekeeping and correction and unwanted corrections, for example. I wish didn't exist. I wish an idea of a standard English didn't exist. I think as long as you're getting your point across, that is all that genuinely matters. Unless, again, specifically you're trying to improve your level of English, for example. But if you're speaking clearly enough, I don't know if it matters a great deal.
Because the language, standard English is used as a gatekeeping function. So it's one of the primary gatekeeping functions at the university. And I would like to see that not being a standard for somebody belonging here. But I do think there's a lot more work to be done on that. So I don't agree with standardized English tests, and I think people can come in here and they have so much to contribute, and it's not based on their use of language.
Just like people understand standard English in different ways, they have different views about the role of English and the status of English speakers.
I'm only want to learn English because for me English open doors for other kind of studies or other kind of society, even for me for which culture, because I have the possibility to know people from Japan, from China, for wherever part of the world. So English is like a tool for know all people.
To speak English sometimes it's universal language. And maybe if you can go to Germany, maybe you can speak German, but you can speak English, and sometimes you can find people that speak English too, and it's better to communicate. Now in Mexico, it's common that you have a bilingual schools. I want to my kids learn English because I think that they will have a better education than me.
It's for some reason the people have this impression that if you say anything in English, it's just like, oh wow, must be very intelligent. Not necessary. I know in India this thing is there since childhood. I have seen that also. If there is a kid, if you learn in your own language, and if somebody starts speaking in English, then you suddenly have that, because 200 years of the Britishers ruled India. We got this one as an asset language, and it made life easy for Indian people, to go across the borders and in the world, and just communicate with them and then settle there and stuff like that. But the notion from where it comes about, why they I don't know. It's just the way how people's mind works sometimes.
Right. Yeah.
I don't know why it is.
Personally, if I go to India ever, if I go with my cousins and I meet them, the main thing there is the food, the culture, and everything. And I want to experience that. So I'm like, oh yeah, I get to speak in my language, because not any of my cousins or my relatives really know English. So whenever I'm speaking, they're like, oh, speak in English. I'm like, why?
Say
and
something.
They're like, yeah, exactly.
Say something in English.
And so
Why?
I just say a sentence and they're like, oh, you have such a cool accent and all. And so then whenever extended family come, they all try to talk in English, and I'm like, let's talk in our language, they're just trying to act in a way that they have that superior feeling that I'm also smart, So yeah, it's not that big of a deal.
I was working in India like as a teacher and principal like that, and then after, people around the world, I can say around the world, people are crazy for English language. People have a misunderstanding. Like if you don't know English, you are dumb.
English is the great language killer, right? And it kills not just other languages, but it kills varieties as well. There's a particular irony, of course, being Irish, that we're having this discussion generally, but also that we're having this discussion, and I am armed with a pretty decent capacity to express myself in the language of the country that colonized and occupied my country for so long and was largely responsible for the death of my native language. So while I'm arguing all this, I'm also arguing it in the language of the oppressor, which is ironic. And there's an understanding that, you know, Irish people have done well in other countries, largely because we're able to speak English, which is broadly ironic.
I think in just like Indigenous language here in Canada, right? Like we don't hear it often because it was, there was genocide in Canada against Indigenous people from white settlers. And so Indigenous language got pushed out. And so there is still some Indigenous language, but it's not every day spoken by the majority of the population. So that for me is like a key way that we see what type of language or English or common language has been prioritized in Canada.